If you don't know me, I'm Stephanie Charrington. On this call, we have Kalika Curry, who is one of our community impact managers, and Vicki Yu, who is our business and operations manager, running things behind the scenes. Peyton is taking a much needed break this week. And Sandy Nathan, our other community impact manager, will not be joining these calls for the next few weeks, as she is very focused on some of our other collaborative action network work that is happening in both early learning and in SEL. It's called MESH, Mindsets, Essential Skills and Habits. So those are some of the other collaborative areas of work that we're focusing on. I don't know that we have anybody new, but if you are new, feel free to please include your name, the organization, community, or neighborhood with which you're associated into the chat, as well as your email address, as making the connections with each other is really, really important in this work, because what we're trying to do is, of course, improve the way that we are working together, which ultimately changes and impacts the system. Moving forward, one of the first places we always start is with gracious space. And that is the opportunity for us to get our minds into the work and to build the container, which is building relationships with one another and deepen those relationships. And so the opportunity for reflection today is making connections to a couple of conversations we've had as we've come together. One is a conversation we had last week, which was related to really reflecting on how this collective work that we're doing together aligns with or not the work that you are doing on a daily basis, or your focus. If you're an individual and not necessarily associated with an organization, what does this look like for your area of focus on a daily basis? And what are the connections or not that exist between that and this collective work that we're doing? The other area of reflection is thinking about, when you think about, are you here to learn or are you here for change? It's an important, we want to deepen that reflection. It's an important recognition that there are those for whom this work deeply, deeply impacts in their daily personal lives. And just because we're learning something doesn't necessarily mean that we have to apply it. As Kalika said, she can learn how to make onion rings, but she's not going to ever apply it because she's allergic to onions. So there is that differentiation, and really being clear about why you're here and being cognizant and conscious of why others might be here is really important. So for you, what is the primary reason you are here? Is it to learn, or are you here for change? So take a moment and reflect on that. And while you're thinking about it, we're going to break up into groups of 3. And Vicki's going to transport us by the power of Zoom into those breakout groups. I do want to mention, it's probably for naught, but just in case, just remember to introduce yourselves if you hadn't had the opportunity to meet. Introduce yourselves. You'll have about 9 minutes to share, so about 3 minutes per person. And enjoy your conversations with one another. Then we'll come back and do a sharing, and then we'll move forward from there. So Vicki, you want to transport everybody into their breakout groups? Oh, and she'll put the question into the chat. Welcome back, everybody. At this point, we had a good discussion in kind of our group of other folks joining on. Want to just open it up and invite people to unmute or put in the chat any reflections that you might have, so that we can have a shared understanding. Anybody want to share some reflections?
I'll share a reflection.
Thanks, Lisa.
It's kind of the effect of the reflection. When we met, I just loved the relationship impact of how we could learn from one another, because what we care about is similar, and we three were in different, I'm not sure exactly how to articulate it. We have different organizations, and they weren't identical, so we complemented one another. And I just was reminded of the power of the collaboration when we kind of shared one another's perspective. I just thought it was kind of cool.
That's great. That's the container building and the deepening the relationships. So thank you. I appreciate that, Lisa. Becky, I see your hand up.
We talked about, I loved that time. We talked about I think we all have a desire for change, but also the difficult nature of how hostile the conversations are outside of this space, how difficult it is to navigate that for change. So I think I would I love being in this space and having these conversations. And then when going to try to tackle some of these issues in larger spaces where there are shared agreements, it's just really difficult to deal with the negative, angry, visceral culture. It feels like people are getting more stretched, and it's getting harder to have these conversations because people's reserve is so low.
Mm-hmm. Becky, I'm curious if I can explore a little bit of that with you, and how this group impacts you having this kind of forum on a regular basis to be able to connect when you go out into the world, so to speak, like you were just talking about. How does this group impact that for you?
I think it's largely the call to learn and listen. Like, I think we need those weekly reminders for myself too, right? To learn and listen, because I think the personal strain of this crisis, we've been in crisis mode for so long. And I think many people don't have those kind of spaces to listen, to reflect, even to have you ask questions like, are you here to learn? Are you here to change? I don't think the majority of people have that. They're so stretched, and they aren't, if people don't have community, they don't have this kind of space to just like stop and think and learn something and recommit to the work. I don't know if that resonates, but it's my
Totally
experience.
makes sense. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's the opportunity to really think about, and we're going to talk about this later in the call, is that we are that system. We're the system. And if we don't take the time to reflect on our own system, we just continue to perpetuate what already exists, and we don't see change.
I want to, an image came up for me as I was hearing you share just a moment ago. My mom always taught me that life is like, I actually have a hair tie here. It's like a rubber band, right? And like the moment you feel like you can't get any more tension is the moment it typically releases and goes flying off. And the more tension you have, the more distance you gain. And so my mom always shared that with me, to like hold on, because that tension, that growing tension, is the energy at which that you're going to be rocketed or propelled forward. And whenever I'm experiencing that strain, I think of that and try to hold that in this like asset way of like, okay, this is the momentum, the energy that's building up to propel me forward through that change. And I think Monica spoke to that at the end of the call last week around like, you got to hang in, because it's like right when you feel like you can't take it anymore is usually where it's going to propel forward. So that's the visual that came up for me as I'm hearing folks talk about kind of getting down to like the bottom of the barrel and not feeling like we have much more to give. That's usually, for me, my lived experience is the evidence of the moment before you propel forward.
Thanks, Kalika. And just reflecting on some other images that we've shared here, it's that the heat or disequilibrium that we might feel that really is where that creativity and innovation comes in too. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's move forward here. So looking at our meeting results for today, you've already kind of gotten your mind into ready to work. You've done some work on building the container and deepening relationships. You'll have the opportunity to do your differentiated work. And specifically, we're going to be talking about a particular area that we're fond of in the backbone called BART, which is boundaries, authority, role, and task. And you'll also have the opportunity to firm up your action commitments. One thing I want to note is that we know that some of the focus groups have been talking about inviting in consultants or community members or others into their work, which is completely fine. We do want to highly recommend that if those invitations are put forth, that you invite them to come at about 10:45 to 11:30 in that focus group time, because in this time, it's where we're doing our learning and really kind of bridging from one week to another. And if somebody kind of drops in, it might be disorienting for them, or they might find it hard to kind of step into this particular position. So just a reminder to invite them in that 10:45 to 11:30 time period, especially if you're having them come next week or the week thereafter. Just a reminder as well that we will be holding these calls for the next 2 weeks. Making sure that all the focus groups can get to a small test of change, and then we'll be taking a short hiatus at that point. Specifically in the meeting results for today, we wanted to highlight 3 particular areas of ideas generated, the strategy and action plan development, and accountability strengthening. So as you are looking at and working on your test of change, this is where we see focus groups are really generating those ideas for those small tests of change, as well as really thinking about what that strategy can look like. And one of the things that I just want to mention, and Kalika will talk about this later too, in that small test of change, it is again the focus on changing how we are changing and modifying our own practices and our work. It's not necessarily a small test of change to see the outcome per se of, on populations in the community. Moving forward for our working agreement, I want to lift this up because these working agreements are living agreements. And over there, you'll see the question of, can you support it? So we just want to make sure that we're lifting this up in particular to allow each of you to have the opportunity to look at it again. If there are any parts of this that you cannot abide by or feel comfortable being a part of, we want to give you the opportunity to lift that up. So I'll give you a minute to reflect on those again. Are there any of these or any parts of these agreements or anything that's missing for our collective work together that you would like to lift up? Okay, I'm going to take silence as agreement. Feel free at any point, of course, to add into the chat as well. Two things that I want to lift up in particular for today, as we are smaller in numbers, I just want to make sure that, especially as folks are going into focus groups, that we are centering those most impacted and really disrupting covert racism. So those are 2 key things that I want to make sure that folks are just being mindful of as we go into the breakout groups. This group is small. It gets even smaller, of course, as we go into the focus group. So really being mindful of those voices is an opportunity. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kalika to take us forward.
Thanks, Stephanie. I have the pleasure of leading us in our data walk today. As Stephanie mentioned, Peyton is not with us today. So bringing back some data that we shared last week, as we're processing this with Peyton, we acknowledged that there was a gap in the correlation between the positive impact that this is having on you all, thinking about sense of community, an understanding of those resources, how to serve the community better, and learning where to take action. But we weren't seeing that correlation or that transfer into helping you do your job better. Wanting to acknowledge, one, getting feedback from some of you that the naming convention or the way that the question is written around doing your job better felt kind of exclusive to people who are on these calls that are here on behalf of an organization. So there's that piece. And the other piece is really wanting to figure out, what is that performance measure that's going to bridge the two? What's the performance measure that's going to take the work and your contributions outside of these calls and really bring them and bridge them into this space? Because ultimately having that shared measure from outside of these calls to inside of these calls, as well as I think as someone was speaking earlier in their gracious space around working across multiple organizations or community groups, but having that shared understanding is really what creates and strengthens a coalition or a group of leaders. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as we're working together today, just really want to take a pause to create some space to hear from you all around what is going to make that number go up? How are we going to get that correlation between the benefits of participating in this to ensuring that they actually lead to change outside of these calls, right? So if we're having a positive impact and there's key takeaways as we're participating, but it's not transferring into how you're leading in the community, then it's not leading to the systems change. So wanting to hear from you all around, how are you measuring? What is the things that you're being evaluated for in your role? So I can give an example. We had a group called Community Engagement for Cultural Integration. Gosh, I feel like over a year ago, we used to have this group, but it was a longstanding Eastside Pathways group. And one of the things that we came up against was wondering, of our partner organizations, which ones had equity statements so that the employees that were trying to lead or charge equity work felt safe doing so. And we ended up finding that not all of the organizations had them, and it was really a stopping point for those leaders. So here's an example of work that people might be trying to lead, but if their organization or community or set of peers don't value that, then it's really hard to lead that change because it's not something that is being evaluated, praised, or measured. And so I want to invite you to open in the chat here or unmute yourself to really lift up, what are the things you're evaluated for? What are the things that you're praised for? And to stretch us even a little bit further, wanted to invite us to really do that centering that Stephanie spoke about a moment ago, to think about whose values or whose yardstick are we using? I know one of the things that I find interesting is that I don't have a value for time the way that other people do. And I have to do a lot of flexing, which means putting a lot of alarms on my calendar and things like that. I don't actually have any clocks in my house aside from my cell phone, which a lot of people find very strange. Time is not a big value of mine, but I have to flex into that so that I can work well with others. So just wanted to invite to hear from you all. What are things that you value? What are things that your organization or community value? And we're going to be collating all of the feedback you give us today and helping us adopt some new performance measures so that we can start to bridge what you're doing outside of these calls with what we're measuring and tracking inside of these calls. So I'm going to invite you to put in the chat. You might reflect on what you get evaluated for by your exec or your upper management folks. You might think about what are things that are in your strategic plan or your charter or your mission work outside of these calls. And I guarantee you, once we see some synergy on those, that's when you really strike gold. This idea that coalitions are empty without shared measure is really true, because if we're not all looking at that Northern Star, watching how it tracks, it's really difficult to hold that synergy we're working to develop together. I'm wondering if any of you are tracked on doing equity work. Is that a part of your evaluation? I'm wondering if any of you are tracked on the number of people you serve. I'm wondering if any of you are tracked on monetary basis, having an understanding of budget, how those dollars are being allocated, what your system values, what gets measured, gets managed. Yeah, Heather, I'm gonna invite you to jump in here.
I was going to say, like, the association that I work with, like for YMCA Greater Seattle, we do have an equity statement, and it's something we are, as an organization, dissecting in a lot of ways between more work, and we've been in the process of creating measurable, like, deliverables with target goals and percentages. It's something that has been integrated into more of the work, and it's being evaluated. I feel like almost weekly at this point of like where we are, but we are we haven't declared what does success look like yet, because I think it's hard like to really say like what will success look like fully, but there is something we can say that as we've been moving through anti-racist work as an organization, there's been more conscious efforts of like how are we being intentional with the speakers that we either bring in, or how we are designing programs to create more equity for members and community.
Thank you. I'm imagining, Heather gave an example of kind of that if we think about that iceberg again, at the bottom is those values and belief systems. So if your organization has an equity statement, they're putting a stake in the ground to say, here are our values. And then what I heard Heather say is going up another level is there's some examination of what's happening at the structural level. So setting those performance benchmarks and targets, and constantly evaluating to get an understanding of what the system is currently doing. And then I heard her name at that program level or that event level, some things around measuring the number of speakers we're bringing in, the events that we're holding. So you can kind of map that to the iceberg. But ultimately, if it's not a part of your values, it's more than likely not going to make it all the way back up to the top as far as like how you're executing. I'm also wondering for us here, as we're trying to come up with some ideas around what we're measured for and evaluated for, if there's not that correlation, if you're just measured for how many people come through your door and now no one's coming through your door anymore, does that mean that you're not busy and you're not working, or does it mean that your performance measures need to change? And so I'm offering that as we're starting to work together in our focus groups, if your organization doesn't value or evaluate the work that you're doing, it's really hard to get backing. I remember in one of our Best Starts for Kids campaigns we're running last year, we had a gal come from a community-based organization who worked in the accounting department. And she walked up to me after the meeting and she said, we don't have anything in our budget for this sort of programming. And that was pretty alarming. And it made sense because her peer who was in the meetings was saying, it's really hard to get money for this. So to have someone accounting come in and say, we don't have a line for this in our budget. I'm like, well, there's your problem, right? Your organization is not measuring it. It's not getting budget, which means it's really hard to execute on it. So we really do want to lift up and hone in on how important it is to have performance measures because they're evidence of that value within an organization and a group. I can share with you a personal example because this isn't just about work. I just moved and I went to a grocery store last night and my best friend's husband saw me there and she messaged me this morning. She goes, don't go to that grocery store. It's not safe. She knows my values. She immediately said Trader Joe's is on 196. Whole Foods is on this street. She knows my values. She knows what I like to eat. She knows I have food allergies. And she immediately got me the resources that I needed because she knew my values. She knew my patterns of behavior. And so people can lean in and jump in to support you when they know those things about you. So I can use this example at a systems level, but we also know at an individual level, having shared understanding of our values and what we're measuring and evaluating success on really ensures how people can jump in and work together.
Hey, Kalika, I just wanted to lift up one thing just for reflection. I really appreciate what people are putting in the chat as well. And I see a lot of points of evaluation on kind of those outcomes per se. Like Benjamin, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Families feeling informed, supported, and empowered. So it's really that outcome. how many of you are supported in and are measured by how you are actually impacting that, meaning how you're changing your work. So Benjamin, for example, the measurement of, it's not just the school district's responsibility to make sure that families feel informed, supported, and empowered. It's other organizations and other individuals in the community. So how are you evaluated on ensuring that you're actually connecting and doing that collective work and changing the greater system? Or even you can look at BSD as a system, how you are working with other departments within BSD to change that internal system so that collectively families feel informed, supported, and empowered.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
And
I think-
also, sorry, let me jump in here really fast, because I was typing this, and one of the things, thinking about how you measure success, and there's different things, right? There is metrics and there is project plans and all these things, but internally, I think, to Stephanie's point, is when you find alignment, right? And I think that's successful when you are bringing like a complex system as BSD, and you're able to align different departments and different groups to work towards a goal, right? It doesn't matter the outcome immediately, but if there's a group of people willing to make the mistake or embark in this path because they see the value or they feel that that's the approach, that for me is successful, right? Because then you're starting that path, you're going through that way, and then the commitment, right? And that's a different way, that's a measurement and stuff. But yeah, that's for me a measurement of success, when you are finally getting this boat sailing.
That's exactly it, Benjamin. I think what ends up happening, and we've talked about this on this call, is that so many times we skip over that critical step. We skip over the measurement of how internal systems or how we work together, expecting to get better outcomes for populations that are being served. And you can't skip over that step. That is changing the system. So thanks for bringing that up in specificity. I appreciate it.
Yeah. That's really great. I'm just taking a pause. Such a rich conversation. Also wanted to double tap on Kathy's contribution here around those technical measures versus being able to scale out and look larger. I think one of the interesting things we've had a couple dialogues about is a lot of strategic plans say the hiring and retention of staff of color. Some of them say highly effective staff of color, which I think I've shared multiple times as a trigger for me. But if you look at root cause, when you think about root cause, I think the intention there is by diversifying staff and leadership that will get better outcomes. And as someone who has been the only staff of color in many occasions, it didn't lead to better outcomes for me or the organization because that's not systems change, that's tokenism. And it wasn't at root cause, right? Like it was not quite there yet. What was wrong was the culture and the environment. And hiring one person of color is not going to fix that, right? Like we're not a magic wand. We're people just like everybody else, and we need community and support and collective effort. So thank you so much for indulging us in this conversation. We're going to collate all of the information that you've given and create time at our meeting next week to continue to dive deeper into and get into that root cause so that the performance measure we're holding, that alignment Benjamin was just speaking about, is something that we can continue to hold and move forward. One thing before I move on, because of the composition, the number of people we have on these calls, normally I'm really encouraging you to not worry about the process, to just like go through it, know that it's an iterative process, but we're going to ask you to lean into learning a lot more today and recognizing that we will have to come back and do some of these things again to make sure we're getting maximum representation and participation from folks on these calls. So really inviting you to lean into a learner stance as we continue to move towards your focus group time today. Recognizing that each of your groups are in different places. You might be in that ideation place where you're still really trying to get to root cause. You're still trying to figure out how to validate your theories. You're still trying to develop shared understanding and figure out what's that thing you all can work on together. you might be actually in a place where you're planning and you're thinking, okay, we have a shared understanding. We know we've got root cause. We validated that with the people that we want to work with. And now we're trying to come up with a plan together. And there may even be a couple of your groups that are in a place of action. We are ready to do a small test of change. We're going to go have that conversation. We're going to go build those relationships. We're going to go build that bridge. We're going to go change that policy. Wherever you are in that process as a group and as an individual, always inviting you to check in on that accountability pathway. It's been a while since we brought that up, but this is one of my favorite tools because it's always that reminder to think and take pause and ask myself, where am I really? Am I really aware of what's happening? Or am I kind of waiting and hoping someone's going to explain it to me? Always wanted to be on that other side of the accountability path where at least I'm acknowledging reality. I don't know what's happening. I'm maxed out. I can't do this right now. Because once we acknowledge reality, then it's a lot easier to take action. Action might look like, I can't do this and letting people know. Action might look like sending an email saying, I can't come today because, but really just always wanted to stay on that right side of the accountability pathway because that's going to lead to change at that personal and interpersonal level, as well as at the systems and collaboration level. Move us on to the next slide. Always wanting to remind us that we are the traffic. Last week we used this imagery around being in this, feeling like we're in this little bucket trying to paddle furiously through these waves and knowing there might be a waterfall coming up ahead, but wanting to shift our thinking to we are the water, we're creating the waves, we are the system. And here's another example that I really appreciate is this idea of, have you ever sat in your car in traffic and thought, oh, I hate traffic. I just want to get home. It's been a long day. And really realizing we are the traffic. The fact that we all systemically choose to get in our cars and drive to work or drive to the grocery store or drive to the dog park, and we all have a tendency to do it at the same time of day, that is a system that is creating traffic. The outcome, the output of those patterns of behavior is traffic. The small test of change is choosing to walk, choosing to ride the bus, working from home, thank you coronavirus, choosing to carpool. Those are all those small tests of change. And where performance measures come in is us all deciding collectively to measure the number of cars on the road during that time. And as folks within the collective or within the system choose to try other modes of transportation like walking and biking, we might see those numbers decrease. And that gives us evidence that as we're working together differently, that we're creating systems change. And it's, again, not something complex. We're not asking you to go buy a new car or move to a different country. We're just saying, try walking once a week. And that might lead to change. And by measuring it, we have evidence of the impact of those changes. And move us on to the next slide. Thank you. So before we send you out into your focus group, we're going to be introducing a tool today called BART. If you haven't heard about BART, I'm shocked because we love BART. If you've used RACI before, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, I believe, it's a great project management tool that makes sure everybody's on the same page around how we're all showing up, what we're accountable for, and who we need to keep consulted or informed on a project. BART is slightly different. It turns it on its head and really gives us a crisp understanding of what our boundaries are, the limitations or the abundance of the resources we have, a really clear understanding of what we have the authority to affect, the roles that we hold that charge that authority, and the tasks that we're responsible for. The boundaries component is something that I really get excited about when we think about adaptive leadership or collaborative work, because it also provides an opportunity for us to invite our values into this space. You might say traditionally, I only work Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, so don't call me after that. That could be a boundary. You might say, if you're a staff member of Eastside Pathways, that our boundary or geographical boundary is East King County. We also talk about the Lake Washington and Bellevue School District catchment areas. Those are often phrases we use around the geographical boundaries. As far as our values as a backbone staff, an example you'll see here on the screen, we operate within the Eastside Pathways values as well as our strategic plan. So that's a really great place to build relationship and be vulnerable with your peers and let them know, you know, I'm a vegan and I'm making this up. I'm not a vegan. I'm a vegan and I really appreciate that there's a protein crisis in elementary school, but my personal values state that I don't eat animal-based proteins. And so I'd really like us to explore some other options. That might be something you say in a group. Moving over to the authority column, the example I often give is when my kids are like, why do you get to decide? I'm like, because I gave birth to you, that's why. I draw my authority from the fact that I gave birth to them. Not necessarily something they enjoy, but that is where I draw my authority from. Authority can be informal, it can be formal. One of the things we really like to hone in on is informal or earned influence. The key component between assigned authority is once you have a job, you're assigned authority that comes with it. And regardless of how well you're working, in general, you get to keep that authority. However, informal or earned influence is something that can be easily lost. And I know a lot of us think about our political power or the relationships that we hold, and it's easy to lose that influence. But at the same time, a lot of times that's what gets things done, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know is a common phrase. Looking at our roles are where we hold and lead that authority and influence. You'll see also that there are formal and informal. Stephanie, our executive here, is known for being Captain Connector. She's so good at like making sure all the inner workings behind the scene are connected and people are talking to each other. I myself, not my formal job title, but because of my personal values, am a self-described equity captain. It's a heavy burden, but someone's got to do it. Vicki is our Zoom DJ. We're always appreciative of her and all the magic she does in the background. And then lastly, before we close out this walkthrough on the tool and invite for any questions here, is tasks. And wanting to differentiate tasks a little bit here. Primary tasks are things like shooting an email, making your lunch. Survival tasks are something that we often forget. They're the things that hold things together. They're all the little things that we do in the background, and they're usually the things that we don't get praised or acknowledged for. Maintaining relationships are survival tasks, right? Because you lose influence without maintaining those relationships. Another key component or type of task that I want to highlight here is abandoned tasks. We know people who have a tendency to pick up abandoned tasks. I know as a mom, there's a lot of things that I end up doing, right, that are abandoned tasks. And I give the example of if I make my kids' bed every day because they haven't done it, they're never going to do it. They're abandoning that task, but I'm reinforcing them not doing it if I do that for them. So really want to be mindful of when we're picking up abandoned tasks because we're reinforcing the system as it exists. And that's why we also talk about getting to root cause, because if we say, gosh, why is there this group of people who don't have food? And we just keep giving them food and never really getting to root cause on why they don't have food, we're never fixing the system. We're just putting a Band-Aid on it and building another program or pattern of behaviors to fix the outputs or outcomes of that system as is designed and existing in this world today. So if you haven't already, please click the link in the chat box to get your workbook open. As always, know that these documents are available for you 24/7 on your Google Drive, and we're going to be inviting you in your focus groups today to complete this workshop, that worksheet together. The purpose of doing BART is as you're solidifying what you might go do together differently in the world, in the community, and your organizations. If you don't know what you have to work with, you don't know the authority that you're holding. I gave the example last week of don't offer plastic surgery to everybody if you don't have a plastic surgeon on your team, right? Don't think that you're going to change the US government policies if you don't hold that authority. We have to be really clear about the authority that we hold in order to develop a plan that's actionable. I'm going to invite Stephanie if you have anything you want to add here or any questions before we move you into your breakout groups.
I don't really have anything to add. I think the one thing that came to mind, I do know in some of the focus groups, there have been discussions about, okay, we don't have the right people here to make the change. So that could be one area of action for your group. And then to Kalika's point, if you are looking at systems for which you don't have authority to make those changes, find the ones that you can make changes. It doesn't mean that that work needs to be abandoned. There are opportunities for moving and starting to make small shifts of change that will ultimately change the system. So.
Yeah, and I want to offer, like, if you've ever seen that video clip where like the one person goes out and they're dancing all alone and then like 2 other people join them and then all of a sudden it's 40, like that analogy of like the crazy person out there charting the new course, as Benjamin said earlier, and then like the early adopters and then everybody going, okay, nobody's laughing at them, I'm going to get out on the dance floor too. So starting with what you have is usually one of the best ways to get things going. And ultimately, if no one gets maimed for it, if everything goes well, then you get other people on board, right? Those small tests of change are bright spots. So again, if the link is available to you in the chat box here, inviting you to open it up, and we'll see you back in a little bit. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed all of our interrupt coaching as much as I did. I know it annoys, it's annoying, but just really wanted to say thank you for all of you for putting your heads down and really getting into this tool. The more you do it, the more you learn about yourself, your organization, your community, your values, your capacity, your limitation, and ultimately, just really wanted to hone in on the fact that as we do this tool and speak for ourselves and talk and represent ourselves, that's when we're going to find those alignment opportunities. And I shared with the wellness group, I gave this example. I used Becky, and I don't think this is actually part of Becky's job, but I said, if Becky's in her group and she keeps saying, we need to focus on, diaper distribution, and come to find out no one else in her group is responsible for that, it's going to be really hard to get everybody to collaborate with you on that, because that's not a part of their job. But as you do BART, you might start to unearth something that you all have in common. So maybe, for example, all of your organizations or your community centers or your neighborhood is really active from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. and you're all responsible for tracking that. That would be the thing you started with, because that's that alignment. So the purpose of going deep into BART as individuals or on behalf of organizations and communities is to be able to really create a clear outline of how that system is currently or person is currently operating in the world, and to be able to find that alignment. Because if you're trying to get these things to force themselves to work together, it's going to be really hard. So know that we'll continue to bring this tool back. You can always work on it offline. The more you do this, the Backbone staff does this together all the time. A couple weeks ago, a PowerPoint presentation wasn't ready, and we were like, we need to go back to BART. Whose task was that? Because that way you can be proactive in your approach versus blaming and shaming, but rather, Lisa, I see your hand up, being really proactive in that. Yeah, Lisa.
I just want to know if we have a need for clarifying questions, if we can email the staff at Eastside Pathway and ask questions.
Yeah, emailing
over the week.
us. Yeah,
Any
and know that
person in particular that would be best to email?
I don't think there's anybody in particular. That's not an assigned BART that we have.
Okay.
See, there was that thing, and that's a great example of BART. Like, if there's not a known BART, it's really hard to have accountability. I could be like, it's Vicky's job, and she's gonna be like, what? That's not my job. So,
Okay.
And know that you're always welcome to interrupt here. But I'm gonna pass things to Stephanie to close us out today, and look forward to continuing to work on this tool with you next week.
Thanks, Kalika. Vicki, do you mind just for a minute showing the last slide, which has our contact information? So Lisa, you have that there. Feel free to literally email any of us, and we'll get more clear on our BART with that for sure. Thanks for bringing that up. So I just wanted to thank everybody for continuing to show up today. We know that these calls are going to be a little smaller in attendance, and so want to just lift up again the opportunity to take those action commitments for all those notes that you just took. For any folks that are in your focus groups, those notes are the opportunity to make sure that folks stay connected on that. So I want to make sure that folks are sharing those broadly with your focus groups. And I just want to close out. We can go back maybe one slide. Vicki, that I thought we'd close out with a one word, which we haven't done lately. So I want to invite folks to open up your chat. And one word that describes your experience on today's call. And you can unmute or feel free to put it in the chat. And we'll just take a couple minutes. I see grateful. Thank you, Becky. Appreciate that. I'd love to get it from everybody. Just one word.
Learning.
Thanks, Kathy.
Constructive.
Thanks, Sue.
Useful.
Thanks, Lisa. I see collaboration. Mandy, thank you. Lalita, energetic. Incomplete, Cassandra, thank you. That's important to recognize. Thought-provoking. What was that, Fresnel?
I couldn't do one. I had to do two.
That's okay.
I always have two words.
We appreciate it. All right, so as we're closing out on those one-word reflections, I also just want to mention we're going to keep the 15 minutes open for this platform. So if anybody wants to stay on, if your focus groups want to stay on, feel free to do so. Vicki will be happy to break you out into your smaller groups if necessary. And we will see you next week, next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Until then, have a great week.